Welcome everyone. We're going to be in Genesis chapters 12 to 14 today. Real quickly though, we're going to just summarize what we covered in the previous chapters of Genesis. So we started in chapter 1, where we had the 6 days of creation, or you could say the 6 ages of creation if you're more of an old earth creationist. Then chapter 2, we get into the 7th day of rest and the specific creation of man and woman on day 6. Kind of backtracks a little bit, gives us a lot more information on what happened then. Chapter 3, we get into the fall of man, where sin has now entered the human race. And we also get into the curses as well as the promise of deliverance in verse 15 there, where it's talking about the Messiah. And chapter 4, Cain and Abel. Chapter 5, we had a genealogy, descendants of Adam. Chapter 6, you had all of these people multiplying, and now they're getting more and more corrupt until it finally came to such a bad point where God decided to wipe them all out with a flood, except for Noah and his family, who found favor in his eyes. Chapter 7, we had the flood. Chapter 8, the flood is starting to subside. Chapter 9, the flood has subsided. They're getting out of the ark, and we have God's promise to never again flood the earth in such a manner. Chapter 10, you had some of the descendants of Noah. Chapter 11, where he covered the Tower of Babel, or the Tower of Babylon, same thing. And then in the same chapter, we had a longer genealogy for Shem, who was one of Noah's sons. And the reason we had another genealogy for Shem is because it gets into Abram. And verse 31, Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and they went ahead and went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. And that's going to be extremely important for our purposes today, because we're going to be talking a lot about Abram in Genesis chapters 12 to 14. Real quickly, let's take a look at our outline for Genesis. And this is what we've looked at before. I just want to bring it up to your guys' memory to remind you of the outline. And the outline is based on a specific Hebrew word, toledot. And this word occurs at the beginning of all of these verse references that I've just sent right there. So the account of the heavens and the earth, or the toledot of the heavens and the earth, that starts in chapter 2, verse 4, goes on to the end of chapter 4. And then you have the account of Adam, and many translations just translate this as the genealogies or descendants of Adam and these people here, but it's the same Hebrew word. And just to be consistent, we've rendered it as the account of, because it's also used not just for people, but also for the heavens and the earth. So you had Adam, then you had Noah, then you had Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, then you had Shem specifically in chapter 11, and then we have Terah in chapter 11, 27 to chapter 25, all the way. It's a long section. And Terah is the father of Abram, and it's interesting because this section doesn't focus on Terah, it focuses on Terah's son, Abram. So it's interesting that way, but we will be focusing on Abram in this section, even though it's kind of titled as the account of Terah, or the descendants of Terah and his genealogy. So that's what we're going to get into today. We have a lot of maps today, because there's a lot of geographical stuff going on. So it'll be mostly maps today, nothing too controversial. So it'll be fairly easy, I think, to run through. So no worries about that. So if you want to be called on specifically to volunteer, you can go to the Bible Study React channel if you want to read a section. So just go to that channel and then just react to that message, and I'll have a list of people I can call on to read. It won't be too much reading each section, but go ahead and go to that channel and react. We have Dogman coming in first on the list. So we will be in chapter 12 to start with. So Dogman, could you please read verses 1 to 9, chapter 12?
Sure. Hold on, I'm just opening it up. I'm going to read from the NASB 1995. Oops, I typed it wrong. You said Genesis 12, 1 to 9?
Yes.
Okay. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, and Bethel on the west, and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev.
Wonderful. Thanks. So that was the first section of Genesis chapter 12. We get into the story of Abram. And God spoke to him, said, "Go forth from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house, to the land which I will show you, the land of Canaan," which we'll get to in a map real quickly. "And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great." So this comes with promises as well. So there's a command to Abram to go out from his country, his relatives' father's house, and then there are also promises included in here as well. "I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. So Abram was obeying the Lord well, did as the Lord said, and he's looking forward to the promises that God has promised him. So my first question starts in verse 3, "And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So this is the promise of God to Abram, and also apparently to all the families of the earth. What does this mean, and how does God, or how will God fulfill that promise of blessing there? Yeah, exactly, Enley. Talking about Jesus, and we know we're talking about Jesus, because if we go into the New Testament, let's see here, Galatians chapter 3:16. "Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring." It does not say "and to offsprings," plural, referring to many, but referring to one, "and to your offspring, who is Christ." So looking forward to Christ, specifically in the offspring promises that God will give Abraham later on in these chapters. And if we go ahead and look at Galatians chapter 3, verse 8, same chapter of Galatians, and the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, in other words, nations outside of the Hebrews and the Israelites, justified by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, "In you shall all the nations be blessed." In other words, Galatians is referring all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, where it's talking about all the families of the earth, or all the nations, being blessed through Abraham. So yeah, that was a good answer, Enley. So we don't get the full picture yet when we're just looking at Genesis chapter 12. So maybe some of you were looking at the context and wondering, how this is going to be fulfilled and things like that. We don't get the full picture in Genesis 12, but when we get to the New Testament, then we start getting the full picture of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So yeah, that was good. Let's go ahead and bring out a map now. And I don't know if I can paste this or not. I will try to paste it. I could. Oh, there we go. So I'm sending you guys a map right now titled "The Migration of Abraham." This comes from the Holman Bible Atlas. And it just gives you a nice little picture of what's going on. And if you look at the previous chapter, chapter 11, we start to see how Abram is moving. They went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. They went as far as Haran and settled there. So if you take a look at the map, you'll see that it starts in the bottom right corner where that little point is at Ur. And then you kind of see the arrows kind of moving around. The solid line is the most likely route that he took. The dotted red line is his alternative path that he might have taken. We don't know exactly what route he took, but we do know his end destination and through the terrain and things like that, and some other details here and there of places he went to, we can get a fairly accurate representation of his migration route. And you can see he went all the way to the land of Canaan, over to the west there. And he kind of continued on, as the chapters say. He also visited Egypt, which we'll get to in this Bible study as well. But hopefully this gives you a little picture of where Abraham was before and how far he traveled. And just remember that this is all traveling on foot as well. Or at least maybe some pack animals. I don't know exactly. We're not told the specific details of perhaps what they rode on yet, but they didn't have cars at least, or roads. So yeah, you can share that hibiscus. Actually, I'm not sure. That might violate the copyrights. This is from a specific book with copyrights though, so it might be best to just leave it here. But we can look into that later. Anyway, that was my first question, and that was the map as well. Any questions on verses 1 to 9 of chapter 12? Yeah, no worries. It was a great question. All right, I'll assume no questions. That's completely fine. Like I said, nothing too controversial here in these chapters. So let's get to verses 10 to 20 now. Call on the next volunteer I see on the list, and that is Sour Patch Danny. So Danny, could you please read 10 to 20 of chapter 12?
Okay. Is my mic okay this time?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly.
Okay. All right, I'll be reading off the NLT. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abraham to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarah, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's kill him. Then we can have her. So please tell them you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you.'" And sure enough, when Abram arrived to Egypt, everyone noticed Sari, is that how you pronounce it? Sari? Beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, their king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. "What have you done to me?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister and allow me to take her as my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get out of here." Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all his possessions.
All right, thank you. So that was the last section of chapter 12. And just real quickly, he asked a good question on how to pronounce that. And in the Hebrew, you would say Sarai. They usually put the stress or the accent on the last syllable. So you might say Sarai. In English, when you anglicize it, you could say Sarai. So that's completely fine if you want Sarai. The important thing is to make a distinction between her previous name, Sarai, and the name that God changes it to, Sarah. So as long as you have that distinction there, and if you're close enough, I think you're fine. So don't worry about that too much. So yeah, we just got to the next leg of Abram's journey. I might say Abraham one of these times, or maybe I already have. But Abram, his name hasn't changed yet to Abraham. So this is where he travels now, sending you guys another map. So if you remember the previous map, the arrow kind of trailed on down to the southwestern area, and that's where Egypt is relative to where Abraham was after he, traveled from the land of Ur and his previous area. Now he's going into Egypt because of famine. So the red line, you can just ignore the green line for now. That's in chapter 14, where we're not at yet. But the red line, where we see, coming from the top right area, I'll say, in the map. Coming from the top right area of the map, he's coming down, going through the land of Canaan, and he gets all the way to Egypt. And that's where we see some things happening. So we get some more narrative going on, some events happening in Egypt. He says to Sarai, his wife, "See, now I know that you're a beautiful woman, so I want you to say that you're actually my sister as we go through this, or else maybe the Egyptians will kill me on account of you." So my first question for you guys, was it right for Abram to say that Sarai was his sister? Was it right for him to do that?
I'm thinking no, because it was technically a lie, and I mean, if the Lord is the one who told him to leave, then the Lord would guide and protect him. He can't just say, "Well, God is the one who told me to leave, and He's taking care of me. But, well, now since I'm out here, I have to try to keep myself safe." It's like, no, the angel of the Lord and the Lord's presence and His angels would protect him, technically. So, methinks bad idea.
All right. Yeah, the first thing you said there, when you said, no, Abram was lying, and other people are saying that he was lying. Well, Abram has, he's got his excuse in Genesis chapter 20, where he does this same thing again to a guy named Abimelech. Abram gives this excuse. He says, technically, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, half-sister, like Enlil said. Yeah, technically, she is my sister. So that's the excuse he would give to anyone who said that, he's lying. But yeah, it was still deceitful, right? Even though it wasn't maybe technically a lie, if you look at it like that, it was definitely deceitful. That's something we can be very clear on. So it was definitely deceitful, and Pharaoh and his attendants are punished for this as well, and they're apparently not happy at all with what has happened. And even more than that, I liked what you said there, Matt, that Abram didn't trust God for anything here. He took matters into his own hands, and in order to do that, he acted deceptively and not according to God's holy standards. He acted deceptively, didn't trust God, and many bad things happened because of this. And when we go through a lot of narrative passages in the Bible, like this section, the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us what Abram did here was bad, what Abram did here was wrong, or anything like that. But we can use our own discernment, and I think we've done that well in measuring Abram's actions with God's standards. That's something that we should be doing with our own lives as well. But there were a number of consequences for his actions. Number one, he almost lost his wife, because Pharaoh took her away from Abram, and there wasn't much that Abram could do against Pharaoh. So God stepped in because it was necessary for Abram and Sarai. It was necessary for them to be there in order to continue the promise of a descendant. You can't really have a descendant if Abram is separated from his wife. So he almost lost his wife there. That's one consequence. Another consequence is that things did go well for him. Ironically, Abram said, "Please say that you are my sister so that it will go well with me because of you." And then we see, okay, things are going well for Abraham now. And looks like it's the same Hebrew word there. May go well with me because of you at verse 13. Verse 16, therefore Pharaoh treated Abram well for her sake. So things are going well. He's getting sheep, he's getting oxen, he's getting donkeys, he's getting male and female servants. Those might seem like positive things, but there is a consequence for that as well. Later on, which we'll read in chapter 13, Abram and Lot's men are quarreling because they have too much stuff. They have too many people. The land can't support them, and they're forced to separate after some internal bickering. So that's another consequence. Another consequence is that most likely Hagar, which we'll read maybe next week or the next couple of weeks, Hagar in chapter 16, she was an Egyptian servant girl, and most likely given as a gift from Pharaoh to Abraham as part of the other gifts that he was giving here. But we also see that Hagar is causing strife between Abram and Sarai in chapter 16, causing all of this dispute and problems. She would also become the mother of the Ishmaelites, one of the consistent primary enemies of the Israelites for a very long time. So there are many consequences going on there. And yes, even though Abram is acting deceitfully, even though he is not trusting in God for help or anything like that, God is still merciful. What else do we learn about God in this section? 10 to 20, chapter 12 of Genesis. What else do we learn about God? Or maybe a more specific thing than just merciful.
Well, I mean, it was utterly deservable that God would, I suppose. See, this is the thing. Jesus was the lamb set apart to be slain before the foundation of the world. So God, in his foreknowledge, has desired to display the depths of his glory in both showing us his justice towards the wicked and in showing us his mercy towards the righteous. And so when God shows mercy to Abraham, you notice that it's undeserved. What he deserved was to lose his wife because he trusted in his own methods rather than in God. What he deserved was to have received what he expected, in the sense of, he was correct in his wisdom to think, well, in all natural means, without a divine intervention, they'll probably try and take my wife from me. But he did not understand the plan and purpose of God, nor trust or depend in it, but yet nonetheless God was still faithful to his covenant to Abraham. I think in part that's why Abraham actually was put into a deep sleep when the covenant between him and God was being made, and the animal, the sacrifice was being received, and that covenant was made. This is a different chapter, but it's kind of like Abraham is a recipient of this covenant love. He is a recipient of this particular faithfulness which God has shown. And in that faithfulness, God protected Sarai, protected her from becoming another man's wife and being taken from Abraham. And God had far better things in mind than what Abraham did, of just, okay, I'm not going to be dead, and I'm just going to be, people will treat me nice because you're really pretty. God had far better plans in mind than what Abraham had in mind. So God was merciful, and he did not negate or change. I mean, he is sovereign and almighty, so he can't, but he didn't, in his plan, he did not show his wrath here towards Abraham for his sin, but instead he showed his mercy. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that was good. We'll just move on then to chapter 13, and I guess I'll start with the map first this time, just so that you guys have some context as we're reading through all the place names and kind of visualizing where Abram is going. Looks like it'll take a few seconds. This map is almost 12 megabytes. So for chapter 13, Abram is going to be moving again, and he's quarreling with his nephew Lot because they just have Well, at least their workers are quarreling because they just have too much stuff and the land is barely enough to support them. Yeah, it is good stuff. So remember, just at the end of chapter 12, we ended with Abram in Egypt, and now he has to get out of Egypt. So there's the map. If you open it up, just focus on the kind of left side right now. Ignore the red line and just look at the blue and green lines. So the blue line starting from the left, if that makes sense. Just look at the blue line. We're going through, traveling eastward, traveling northwards a little bit. He gets to Bethel and Ai, and at that point, right where the blue line ends, that last arrow, that's when Abram and Lot kind of split up. So Lot is looking over to the east a little bit. He sees the land around Sodom and Gomorrah as very fertile, and he decides to split off, and that's where that green line, that's what that green line represents. It represents Lot kind of splitting off, traveling around the Dead Sea, and landing right at the southern point of the Dead Sea, where Sodom and Gomorrah and the other places are most likely at. That's kind of where Lot has decided to settle there. So you can kind of look at the map, and you can read through the chapter as well, look through that and follow along as the reader goes through it, if you want to see that. And looks like Matt is the next person on the list. So Matt, could you please read verses 1 to 18, just the whole chapter, chapter 13?
Of course. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 13 of Genesis from the NASB. I forget if this is the 1995 NASB or if this is the other one, but I think it's the older one. Anyways, verse 1. So Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife, and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together. Could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Hold on, I need a sip of water. 1 sec. Okay. Now, Canaanite and the Prezerite were dwelling in the land. Verse 8. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if to the right, then I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of Jordan, that it was well watered. That it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. Verse 11. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Verse 12. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also can be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord.
Nice, thanks. So that was all of chapter 13. we see that quarreling between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen, such that they have to split off now. And we already looked at the map, and that just shows kind of where they went, split off. If you just ignore all the other lines, I know there's a lot of lines on there. Just the blue line coming from the left, Abram and coming from Egypt, and then they get up there to Bethel and Ai, and that's when they kind of split off. And Abram's left in that area to kind of look around and see God's promises, where Lot kind of goes all the way down to Sodom. And there's an interesting kind of foreshadowing, perhaps you could say, where in verse 13 it says that the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord, perhaps foreshadowing the terrible time that Lot and his family as well as the visitors have, which we'll get to eventually. Just know that it's a little foreshadow perhaps. And it's also interesting that that appears in an area of context where it's just talking about how wonderful the land is, how beautiful and fertile the land is, even comparing it to the Garden of Eden. And then the people, though, they aren't as wonderful as the land is. So any questions on chapter 13? Or any thoughts?
Yeah, one thought is that this is pretty interesting. So let's see, which verse was it? Possessions were great. Let's see, verse 8. Okay, so Lot lifted his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan. And it says it was well watered everywhere. And then it's like, kind of like in parentheses, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And then it goes on to say, like the garden of the Lord. So that's a reference to the Garden of Eden. And I have a little note there, but I'm not sure which of my things it's for. But anyways, I think that's interesting because that's a very strong reference. I mean, I don't know how many times the Garden of Eden is referenced, but this is the only time I think that it's referenced in Genesis, from what I know, in looking back at it, saying this thing that's after it looks like it or is like it. So we know that Canaan, Jordan, Canaan, kind of same place. Canaan was full of very sinful people, and that's why the Lord brought judgment on them. And also the land was so full and rich that it brought forth, grapes as big grapes that you'd have to use more than one person to carry, and just these very luscious fruit. And we can even see in Israel some of that. The land is very fertile and it brings forth a great amount. I forget how much, but it brings great yields, and it has just very healthy plant life from the best of my memories. But nonetheless, at this time, there was that sort of beautiful appeal. But even before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, it says that they were exceedingly wicked, and they were sinners against the Lord. So in Hebrew, from what I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mark. In Hebrew, they'll use two different words that mean a similar or almost same thing to communicate emphasis. So if it says exceedingly sinful and wicked, that's like it's saying the same thing twice, giving a double imperative, meaning very, very bad. It's like the difference between saying, oh, that was good, or saying, that was really good. It's like that, except in the Hebrew language, they just used more than one word, if I'm correct. So even before the Lord destroyed them, they were very wicked. And that was when Lot was just like trying to pick somewhere to go. We don't know how much time transpired in between, or at least I don't know. I'm sorry, I won't say we. I don't know how much time was in between Lot choosing that and then when it was destroyed. But, couldn't have been that long because it was within his lifetime. So, and I think it was very honoring that Abram decided to let Lot choose. And that turned out to be actually a good thing. Because the Lord, then spoke to him and said, you're going to have descendants that outnumber the dust of the grains of sand. And we know that that is fulfilled in Christ, and all of the numberless multitudes in heaven that have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb that sing unto the Lord, were considered Abraham's offspring by faith, it says in the New Testament. So we're partakers of the promise by faith in Christ. So, those are my thoughts. There's more I could say, but I think I'm too tired to bring any other cohesive thoughts together.
No, that's fine. You said a lot of stuff there, and I'll try to go through the things I can, at least. So you mentioned that perhaps this is the last time that the Garden of Eden is mentioned, and a quick word study, emphasis on quick. I don't see the word garden being mentioned elsewhere in Genesis after chapter 4 of Genesis. And I don't see Eden being mentioned either after chapter 4 of Genesis. So I don't see the Garden of Eden elsewhere in Genesis except this one place in chapter 13. So yeah, perhaps there is an extra emphasis there in making that comparison to the Garden of the Lord, and that comparison is not made elsewhere in Genesis to anything else. Next, you talked about the Hebrew a little bit, and I'm going to have to disagree with you right here in this specific place. Though you did get it a little right, though, where for kind of the superlative degree, sometimes the comparative degree, the Hebrew will simply repeat a word or maybe even use a very close synonym to add more emphasis. But that's not what's happening here. So, it's a possible, grammatical feature of the Hebrew language, but that's not what's happening here, at least as far as I can tell. So you have two separate words. You have one word for exceedingly and one word for sinners, but it looks like it's an adjective here. And most translations just kind of smooth it out in English, render it as a noun, sinners. But you have those two adjectives, and then you have another modifier on here. Or at least you could say, oh yeah, it is another modifier. But the word exceedingly is a third Hebrew word in here. And that's a specific Hebrew word. So the translations get exceedingly not from a descriptive word being repeated multiple times, like the word holy, for example. That's probably the biggest example. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. And it's just repeated to show just how holy the Lord is. But they don't get the word exceedingly from repetition. They get it from a specific Hebrew word that just means exceedingly, or greatly, you could render it as. Or in some contexts, you could say it's of quantity, a marker of quantity, but it's very, could be rendered as greatly or exceedingly or much. But yeah, that's still a good point, though, because there is a lot of emphasis there on just how bad these people were. So it's good to point that out. And there was one more thing that you mentioned, and it was that Abram was indeed very gracious, I would say. Right, Abram, he's the man. He's got the promise. He's got the promise of land and things like that. And yet here he is, he's kind of stepping back and saying, okay, Lot, I'll let you choose whatever piece you want. And Lot, he's got these big saucer eyes. He's all greedy. He's like, oh, that land over there, it looks pretty nice. Got this rainfall, got this fertility. I think I'll head on over there. And there's definitely a consequence to that, which we'll read in the very next chapter. But yeah, it was very gracious of Abram. And, we focused on his failures in the previous chapter of not trusting the Lord, of being deceitful. But, there's some good stuff to Abram. And he's being gracious toward his nephew Lot. And we'll see that he also risks his life in the next chapter for his nephew. And, he's still praising the Lord. He's still worshiping. He built an altar to the Lord in verse 18. And, we see that he's not all bad. But he's like most other, patriarchs and characters of the Bible where, yeah, God has chosen them. Yeah, they live, pretty decent lives. Relatively speaking, but they have their own failures and own things that they have issues with. But we do have to move on to chapter 14 now, and I have some more maps. So chapter 14, just remember that Lot has already gone down to the area of Sodom. And there's some crazy stuff going on in this particular area. And I'm loading up a map right now. This is going to be a fairly big map, so it might take a little bit to load. Alright, so this is the section where we get a war between 4 kings and 5 kings. So the 5 kings, they were conquered by the 4 kings beforehand, and they were made to and forced to give tribute to these 4 great kings. But one day they decided to rebel against their overlords, and they didn't want to give tribute anymore. So they were rebelling, and so the 4 kings of the northeastern area, the 4 kings, the big ones, they had to come down and, make things right again, force the 5 little kings back into submission. So here's the map of that. And if you remember where Sodom was, it was all the way to the left, right under the Dead Sea. You can kind of see through the map where that ends, kind of where the red line ends, right under that body of water. And if you look at the multiple bubbles over to the right, you have some purple bubbles under Goim and Elisar, you have a green bubble under Shinar, and you have a red bubble under Elam. That's the land, kind of the territory, a rough estimation of the territory of the 4 kings' land. So 1 king in Elam, 1 in Shinar, which is the land of Babylon, 1 in Goim, and 1 in Elisar, kind of the northeastern area. And then you can see just how far they had to travel and what they had to do to get all the way down to Sodom. And that is where the battle took place, the Valley of Siddim. It's near Sodom, basically. You can think of it that way. And that's where the war happened. Yeah, bubbles. All right, we'll get our next reader, and our next reader is Tia. So Tia, could you please read verses 1 to 12, and then we'll get another map, and then you can read 13 to 16. But just read 1 to 12 for now.
Okay, sure. I'm reading from the NKJV. Okay. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arikboch, king of Elishar, Shedulamer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemper, king of Zeboim, the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is called Sea. 12 years they served Shedulamer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Shedulamer, the kings that were with him, came and attacked Idaraphim in Astaroth, Karnaim, the Suzim in Ham, the Emim in Shaveh, Kirathim, and the Horites in their mountains of Seir, as far as El-Haran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back to come to En-Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites, who dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. And the kings of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went and joined together in the battle in the valley of Siddim against Shedulamer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elisar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed.
Nice. So that was verses 1 to 12 of chapter 14. And just a real quick note, looks like the NKJV uses the word nations, and that's a fine translation. So goim can just be translated as nations, and some commentators, including the one that we're reading through, some commentators do believe that nations is the better translation. So we're not talking about a specific city or nation, singular. We're actually just talking about a king of multiple various little nations. So that's a fine translation. And as we go on, we saw a couple other battles as well. I didn't mention them because they weren't the main battle at the Valley of Siddim, but if you do look at the map, you will see Kiriathaim, and that's where one of the battles took place. So you can kind of map out. So they went on down south, they did one battle, and they kept on going, they did another battle until they got to the Siddim, and they did the main battle that we're looking at. And so the 5 kings who used to pay tribute to the 4 big kings, they have rebelled, and then they lost the battle, and now a lot of them have been captured. A lot of the goods that they had were captured, and they also took Lot. It's almost like an afterthought. They also grabbed Lot and his stuff, and then they left. So that was verses 1 to 12. We're going to get into one more map before we read the next little section, which Tia will read again, but it's a short one. It's just 13 to 16. But this talks about Abraham's counterattack in the next section. So his nephew was just captured. A fugitive came, told Abraham what had happened, and so Abram said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and rescue my nephew Lot. So he mounts this rescue counterattack kind of plan, and that's what the map here illustrates that I just sent in the chat. And we started off, of course, around the Sodom area, and then you can see that the red line starts at Mamre, where Abram is located at, and he goes ahead, he's got to travel a ways. He doesn't travel all the way northeast, but all the way to where the red line ends, and he goes ahead and rescues his nephew Lot. All right, Tia, could you continue reading verses 13 to 16?
Sure. Okay. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Ishmael and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his force against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the woman and the people.
Nice. So we just looked at the kidnapping of Lot, and then we just read Abram's counterattack and his rescue mission there. Now, while all this is going on, I think this gives us an interesting window into kind of the politics and battles that happened in the ancient world. So first you have vassals, people subjected to various other kings, such as the northeastern kings, and the 5 little kings were forced to pay tribute to these bigger, more powerful kings. Then they rebelled. So it gives you an interesting picture of how things happened at that time. We also see alliances and allies. So you had the 4 kings, they were kind of allied together. You had the 5 kings, 5 little kings allied together. And you also see Abram. He's got allies as well. So he's got Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and these were allies with Abram, and they also went out with battle with Abram on this crazy mission to go and attack 4 powerful kings who apparently have vassals, they have the resources, they have the men, and they've annihilated the small 5 kings multiple times, and now little Abram and his buddies are going to go to battle with him. So one of my questions is, how did Abram and his allies defeat the 4 kings who were strong enough to subdue others and force them under tribute? How did Abram beat those guys and rescue Lot? Yeah, exactly, Enley. Go ahead, Matt, if you're going to say something.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, let me look at the chapter. I have to read over it.
But yeah, while you're thinking, I'll just point out, later on we'll read this, and this will be the last section we read. But chapter 14, verse 20, this is someone talking to Abram. He says, "Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." So exactly as Enley said, maybe even stronger than that, too. God was with him. God delivered his enemies into his hand.
Yeah. I think so too, because it says that he led out his trained men born in his house 318, and they went in pursuit, and his forces against them by night. So there was a little bit of stealth tactics, and I suppose the kings were somewhat cocky. I mean, this is just the physical elements, not the supernatural intervention of God. But I mean, God works through often not only supernatural, but also circumstantial means that have been divinely orchestrated. And I think that one of those is God's grace guiding Abraham to be able to, plan and strategically, move in at night and be stealthy and all that stuff. So it's not as miraculous or peculiar as Jericho, which was a miracle, or as Gideon, which was like a mixture of miracle and God telling them what to do and them doing it and it working, So yeah, definitely God gets the glory for helping Abraham.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned, some of the physical, natural quotations, the natural kind of things that were helping Abram, defeat these people. So, he was being tactical about it. He was splitting up his forces to defeat them. And another thing that I would mention in addition to that is that some scholars believe that 318 trained men, which is what Abram had, is actually a significant number. Back in the ancient world, in this particular period of time, was actually a significant number because it took a lot to especially equip people. That was the main limiting factor, where getting equipment for people for battle was very expensive and difficult to get. So some scholars believe that 318 trained men, assuming that they're equipped for battle, was actually a significant number. And of course, we know from the previous chapters that God was blessing Abraham with all of this stuff and possessions and wealth and things like that. So God was still definitely at work here through these more physical kind of means. But yeah, very interesting stuff.
Last thing I'll mention is I think the kings probably could have been kind of cocky since they thought they defeated all their enemies. And they didn't even know Abraham was like this. Like, I don't know how they could miss him, but if Abraham is able to rally all those soldiers, like you said, in fact, he was so big that the land Lot and him were in couldn't even sustain them.
Very true.
It was apparent that God had very much blessed and helped Abraham to grow and become strong, and he had much of everything: animals, livestock, servants, and those servants, I think, could be utilized and equipped as soldiers. So the male servants. So, but yeah, however it went out, I think you have a good point there. It's like the surprise attack from this giant tribe, and of equipped soldiers at night, and the Lord's with them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe, like you said, they were arrogant as well. Oh, we just beat them. We got all this food, possessions, time to celebrate now. So yeah, maybe they're a bit arrogant. Maybe they're even a bit tired from battle. Maybe they had some losses as well. All of that worked together by God's sovereignty and providence for Abram's good here. So yeah, very good stuff. And I'm trying to think of if there was one more thing that I wanted to mention. I think there was, but I can't remember it right now. But we'll get into the last section now which is chapter 14, verses 17 to 24. Let me see who's on track to read that. So Hibiscus, could you please read chapter 14, verses 17 to 24?
Sure, I might. Great. Hello,
Oh, hi.
can you hear me?
Cutting out a little bit, but I think it might be fine.
Okay, I'll try my best to just read all out. Okay, I'll be reading from NASB 1995, verse 17. Go. Then, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shabek, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." He gave him a tenth of all. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give the people to me and take the goods for yourself." Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, for fear you would say, 'I have made Abram rich.' I will take nothing except what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share."
Perfect. Don't worry, Matt. I just remembered what I wanted to say for the previous section where Abram was doing the counterattack and rescue mission. One last thing about that section, it's more of a fun fact, really. Whatever you think about the modern nation of Israel, they actually use biblical tactics in their warfare whenever they can. So they map out the terrain, they look at biblical tactics and see, and it's not just, they might have used this passage in Genesis, but it's more along the lines of the other wars in the Bible, such as the ones in Kings or Judges and Chronicles and places like that. And it just shows the accuracy of the biblical tactics in, mapping out the terrain and having tactical value as well. Whatever you think about the nation of Israel, they have used biblical tactics and it has gone well for them. So I just wanted to point that out as kind of like an accuracy and significance point, because they do have tactical significance, the things that people like Abram do, especially the other kings in wars in the later chapters and books of the Bible. So that was just a fun fact. So Monkey D. Luffy asks, why would he say he made Abram rich? And yeah, Danny gives a good answer there, to boast. And we don't know about blackmail, but we do know that the men of Sodom were wicked, so perhaps blackmail was an option on the table there. But yeah, mostly the boasting part. And Abram wants to make sure that everyone knows that he can be a good witness to everyone as well of God's goodness and God's provision. So yeah, that's a good answer there. But he's still looking out for his allies too. He says, except my allies here who aren't really with me, but still had a good share in this. I want to take care of these allies. So yeah, let's look at Melchizedek real quick. If you have a question, just kind of hold on to it after we get through Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a very mysterious character in the Bible. He's mentioned a number of times. So, kind of a bit of a Bible trivia thing. So, where else is Melchizedek mentioned that you guys can think of? Because I know you've heard of him before. Yeah, Hebrews. That's the main passage where he's mentioned. He's also mentioned in Psalm 110:4. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Most of the theology of Melchizedek comes from Hebrews, though. So the way this is set out, let me just give you all the verses real quick. And I'm just going to try to post these without the Bible bot so they're not spamming everything. And there we go. So those are the verses where he's mentioned. So you could think of this as Genesis introduces us first to Melchizedek and lays down the foundation for the theology. Psalms then declares the Messiah to be after the order of Melchizedek, among other things, but mainly that. So it's not just something in the New Testament. This is something of a messianic prophecy and fulfillment, starting in Genesis, being clarified in Psalms. And then Hebrews gives us the main theology of everything about Melchizedek and his connection to Christ and things like that. So first, let me pose a problem to you, and we'll see how the Bible solves this problem throughout thousands of years. So the problem is that Jesus has to be a priest, and he is a priest. The Messiah has to be a priest. But there's a problem here because only Aaronic Levites can be priests under the law. So you had to be not just a Levite, but under Aaron, being one of Aaron's descendants in order to be a priest under the law. So that is kind of those are the rules, basically. And here's the problem. Jesus is not from the tribe of Levi. He's definitely not a descendant of Aaron either. So the problem is, how can Jesus be a priest if he's not an Aaronic Levite? If he's of the tribe of Judah instead. And you have to be of the tribe of Judah to have Davidic kingship. So you get this kind of tricky issue. Okay, how can you be king and priest at the same time if you have to be of the tribe of Judah to be a Davidic king, but you have to be of the tribe of Levi to be a priest? So that's the problem. And here's the biblical solution. And we looked at this in our Hebrew study. So you can, I think it was mostly in chapter 7, you can pop back there and see more on it. Well, we know that from the genealogies that didn't happen, but maybe that could have been another solution. There is a better solution, though. Genesis chapter 14, we see that Abram is giving tithes to Melchizedek. And as we look at the rest of the chapters and passages in the Bible, we see that there is significance here because Levi was in the loins, as the Bible says, in the loins of Abram when he gave tithes to Melchizedek. In other words, showing that Melchizedek is superior to Abram, and because Levi was a descendant of Abram, it also shows that Melchizedek was in some sense superior to Levi, who was a descendant of Abram. So that is the start of the solution. The second step in the solution is in Psalm 110:4, which declares the Messiah as to be of the order of Melchizedek. And Hebrews says the same thing. He's been designated or appointed as priest by God of the order of Melchizedek, talking about Jesus. And this is significant because now we can have a priest, but you don't have to be of the tribe of Judah. You just have to be of the order of Melchizedek, whom God has appointed. And that's what happened with Jesus. There's a lot of other significant things going on there as well. One thing is that when the priesthood changes, then the law also changes as well. We got into that with Hebrews, I think chapter 7 as well. So the law has also changed, and Jesus has fulfilled the law. And there are some changes that were brought about with that in how we can, how we apply that to our lives now. But I don't want to get into too much detail because Genesis doesn't give us all of that detail. It just gives us the first step of all of that. Thousands of years before Christ, thousands of years before all of this, God has a plan, even, with the strict laws of the Levitical priesthood and things like that. He's still got a plan to make all of this work out somehow. And I think that's really cool. Starting all the way back in Genesis, laying the foundation of this with something that I think we can easily overlook. Abram paying tithes to Melchizedek. Any questions on this last section of chapter 14, verses 17 to 24? Or any thoughts or comments you wanted to bring up?
I think that you put it pretty well with the Melchizedek thing, because I was actually thinking along the lines of, well, since Jesus was a priest in the order of Melchizedek, it didn't have to be in the order of Aaron. But you said why that was the case. I have to sneeze at you. Hold on.
That's all right.
Anyways, yeah, basically that's what the logic Hebrews gives, is where it says, the one who blesses is greater than the one being blessed. And so Melchizedek blessed Abraham, and he blessed, his and then it talks about how they were still in Abraham. So hold on.
All right, while Matt is thinking, I want to give out just a couple little more fun facts, kind of. Some people believe that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate version of Christ. Not really version, but pre-incarnate Christophany appearance of Christ. That's a possibility. Others believe that he was just Melchizedek and not a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And one last thing I want to mention while Matt is thinking is Salem there, whom Melchizedek was king of. Salem just is short for Jerusalem, which could be a little bit of a foreshadowing to the future big city of Israel and Abram's descendants. So Melchizedek was king of Jerusalem. Now, it wasn't an Israelite city at that time, of course, but later on, when David takes the throne and gets hold of Jerusalem, then that's when that happens. And, might be a little foreshadowing there, perhaps. Do you have your thoughts ready, Matt? Or at least be able to talk about them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think I don't have anything actually better to say than what you already said about Melchizedek, that he blessed Abraham, and in doing so, it was basically revealed that it was superior. And I also forgot to mention what you just mentioned, so that's why you're leading the Bible study, not me. The idea that this was like a epiphany. This was not an epiphany. You said it better. Why am I trying to just say what you just said? So yeah, I don't have anything else to say.
All right, well, that's fine. One last fun fact then. So Dogman says that Salem also means peace. I haven't looked into that, but it would be an interesting study. I know that Melchizedek's name itself means king of righteousness. So if we do take both of those together, he could be the king of righteousness by his name and king of peace by Salem. So perhaps it tells us a little bit about Melchizedek's character, and some people take this as a little extra evidence that perhaps we're talking about a pre-incarnate Christ who's Melchizedek and also Christ later on. It's a possibility. But we'll just end it there then. So that was chapter 14. Any final questions? Short questions, if you have any. All right, we'll close it out then. Dogman, could you please lead us in a word of prayer?
Yes. Like no matter how many people react, it's always me. All right. Lord, thank you today for this Bible study and this time to get together and study your word. We love you. We want to seek you all the days of our lives. We want to bear our cross every day. Help us to do that. Help us to apply your word in our lives and learn and grow in how you want us to learn and grow. And give us your peace in everything that happens in our lives. In Jesus' name, I pray, amen.
Amen.
It is the tradition.
Oh yeah.
It's like it never fails.